All right, welcome to class, everyone. Go ahead and grab a seat. So, today's explainer is going to function a bit like a forensic history lecture, where we'll investigate a massive, self-inflicted biological catastrophe that plagued the ancient Roman Empire. We're going to put on our detective hats and solve a medical mystery that completely baffled historians and archaeologists for decades.
Here is our syllabus for today's session. We'll be covering 6 parts. First, the elite paradox. Second, the aqueduct myth. Third, the culinary culprit. Fourth, the chemistry of Sapa. Fifth, clinical symptoms. And finally, case studies in madness. Let's just dive right in.
Part 1. The elite paradox. Let's open things up with the core paradox of our investigation.
Picture the absolute peak of the ancient Roman Empire. You probably imagine these sprawling marble palaces, endless decadent banquets, powerful patricians draped in the finest imported silk, right? These masters of the known world literally had unlimited access to the absolute best medicine, the cleanest spring water, and the highest quality food of their era. So logically, you'd assume these wealthy elites lived super long, comfortable lives. But the archaeological reality, which is proven beyond a shadow of a doubt by modern skeletal analysis, actually shows they were dying significantly younger than their poorest, overworked slaves. And not just dying, but suffering agonizing chronic pain and severe mental breakdowns. The most powerful people on the planet were mysteriously expiring.
Part 2. The aqueduct myth. Before we can uncover the true culprit here, we really need to scientifically dismantle a very famous textbook myth you've all probably heard.
Now, what's really interesting is that we're going to debunk a theory that feels, frankly, incredibly logical to our modern minds. You've almost certainly heard that the Romans were poisoned by their own advanced plumbing system simply because their pipes were made of lead. It sounds perfectly plausible, right? Well, actually, scratch that. It's absolute scientific fiction. See, the reality of Roman engineering was that their aqueduct water flowed constantly and violently. It never just sat stagnant inside those pipes, not even for a single second. Plus, the natural spring water in that region was incredibly hard, meaning it was heavily saturated with minerals. Because of this, the inner walls of the lead pipes were rapidly coated in this thick, impenetrable layer of calcium carbonate. And this hardened mineral crust, it essentially created a flawless, perfect protective barrier between the toxic metal and the drinking supply. So, class, I pose this question to you. If their magnificent water supply was actually perfectly safe, where on earth was this fatal threat hiding?
Part 3. The culinary culprit. To find our answer, we have to look away from Roman engineering and look directly at their primary source recipe books.
You see, the absolute greatest pride of aristocratic culture was their legendary wine. But ancient wine was radically different from the refined, balanced stuff we drink today. It spoiled incredibly fast, rapidly turning into this harsh, acidic vinegar with just an overwhelmingly bitter taste. Because of this, Roman chefs desperately needed a powerful chemical preservative and a highly effective sweetener, just to make these prestigious drinks, actually palatable. Pure honey was astronomically expensive, and it completely altered the intended flavor profile. Oh, and refined sugar? It simply didn't exist yet. So they needed a solution.
And this brilliantly illustrates human ingenuity, though in this case, fatal ingenuity. The culinary masters of the time invented this brilliant solution called Sapa. What they did was take huge volumes of unfermented grape juice and slowly boil it over an open fire for hours and hours until it drastically reduced into this thick, sweet paste. But here's the catch. The deadly secret wasn't the grapes themselves. No, it was the specific metal cookware they used for the boiling process.
Part 4. The chemistry of Sapa. Let's step into the shoes of a chemistry professor for a moment to understand the invisible, fatal reaction taking place right inside those imperial kitchens.
Let's see how this literally builds a recipe for disaster. If you try to boil acidic grape juice in a traditional copper or bronze cauldron, a rapid chemical reaction happens that completely ruins the syrup. It gives it this foul, bitter, highly metallic taste. The Romans quickly figured out this culinary problem. So to achieve the absolute perfect flavor, their recipe books strictly demanded the use of incredibly heavy pots forged from pure unalloyed lead. Within the bubbling heat of these heavy cauldrons, the natural fruit acids from the boiling grapes aggressively attacked and dissolved the inner walls of the lead pots. This continually forced the toxic metal to bind directly with the syrup itself.
This catastrophic and, remember, entirely invisible chemical reaction engineered a miraculous culinary discovery. It created a brand new compound called lead acetate. Today, modern chemists refer to this deadly substance by a terrifyingly accurate nickname, sugar of lead. It possesses an intensely vibrant, clean, and dangerously divine sweetness that dramatically enhances basically anything it touches.
The Roman aristocracy became absolutely mesmerized by this sweet syrup. I mean, they genuinely believed they had found a flawless recipe from the gods themselves. This dangerously sweet lead syrup became a massive, widespread cultural obsession. They poured it into absolutely everything, sweetening their expensive vintage wines, enriching their rich meat sauces, and even mixing it into their daily drinking water. They were voluntarily consuming astronomical, lethal doses of a devastating neurotoxin every single day.
Part 5. Clinical symptoms. Now let's review the biological fallout by looking at the medical consequences of this extreme heavy metal accumulation in the human body.
Lead possesses this incredibly insidious biological trait. It cannot be easily expelled by the human body. Instead, it slowly and relentlessly accumulates deep inside your bones, your internal organs, and your delicate brain tissue. The elite were experiencing terrifying neurological damage and agonizing physical pain. The very first symptom was often severe gout, literally leaving powerful senators screaming in the night from the pain. Then it launched a catastrophic assault on their reproductive systems, causing mass infertility among wealthy patrician women and severe physical and cognitive deformities in the surviving aristocratic children. The elite were unknowingly sterilizing themselves in pursuit of luxury. And on top of that, chronic exposure to these heavy metals triggers uncontrollable outbursts of primal aggression, crippling paranoia, and rapid progressive dementia.
Part 6. Case Studies in Madness. We can now actually re-examine the darkest historical accounts of the insane Roman emperors, not as genetic anomalies, but as end-stage toxicology patients.
Let's look at Emperor Caligula. We all know the legendary stories, right? Trying to appoint his horse as a high-ranking political consul, ordering his imperial legions to violently attack the ocean waves. Well, modern toxicologists are almost entirely convinced that this legendary madness wasn't caused by inbreeding or some natural psychiatric disorder. No, this was an undeniable textbook symptom of severe lead acetate poisoning.
And then, of course, we have Nero, who ruthlessly murdered his own family members and allegedly played music while his capital city burned to ash. His monstrous, deeply paranoid behavior perfectly aligns with a mind completely destroyed, from the top down, by the empire's sweetest, most expensive wine. They were literally losing their humanity and transforming into aggressive, paranoid monsters simply because they could afford the absolute best.
So the crucial point here is that this perfectly solves our initial demographic anomaly. Why were the poor outliving the rich? Well, because the impoverished lower classes and your ordinary overworked slaves were simply too poor to ever afford the expensive Sapa syrup. They drank cheap, bitter wine diluted with safe water, and therefore, they remained perfectly healthy. The ruling class essentially poisoned its own collective mind, destroying the intellectual foundation of the empire from the top down, while the working class ironically survived precisely because of their lack of wealth.
I'll leave you with this final thought, and consider this a prompt for your next essay. History shows us that Rome didn't just fall to barbarian swords. It succumbed to its own insatiable appetite. It serves as a chilling warning about the unseen costs of unchecked luxury. If the absolute rulers of the ancient world were unknowingly addicted to a deadly sweetness that literally brought down an empire, we have to ask ourselves, what hidden dangers of extreme luxury might be silently poisoning our modern world today? All right, class dismissed, and I'll see you in the next explainer.